They told you silence was absence, but it is not. It's a weapon, a boundary, a quiet revolution. Because the moment you stop being available, the manipulators scatter, the mask cracks, and what rises from the silence? Power. A lone figure stands at dusk, a silhouette against the fading light. There is a haunting paradox at the heart of human connection. The more one pours their energy into others, the more one's own spirit seems to wither. In our longing to be needed and loved, we overgive, answering every call, soothing every hurt but our own. It is a forgotten truth whispered in ancient circles. One can lose oneself by constantly living for others. The soul that is always available to everyone becomes a stranger to itself, its inner voice drowned in the clamor of external demands. And so the journey begins, an initiation into an inner sovereignty long forsaken. This is the rite of reclaiming oneself, a quiet revolution that starts when one withdraws from the noise and steps back into silence. It is a journey of shedding shackles, of turning inward to discover a throne hidden in the chambers of the heart. In crossing this threshold, the seeker enters a sacred solitude, and nothing will ever be the same. At the center of our tale is the force of emotional availability, a gentle quality that, when unchecked, becomes a form of self-betrayal. Imagine a great reservoir of psychic energy inside each person, meant to nourish their own growth. Yet a person who is endlessly available to others pokes holes in their own reservoir, letting their life force leak away drop by drop. Every unsolicited yes when one's heart says no is like a crack in one's spirit, a small act of abandonment of the self. What begins as kindness can turn into spiritual erosion, wearing away the integrity of one's identity. In psychological terms, this is the peril of porous boundaries, when the lines that separate one's own needs from others' demands are blurred or non-existent. With no boundary to hold form, the self is flooded by the will of others. Such a person becomes like a castle with its gates forever open, each visitor helping themselves to the treasury within. Day by day, the sovereign of that castle, the inner self, is depleted, diminished by overexposure. What remains is a shell, a being who exists more for others than for itself. Emotional availability, once a virtue, has become a vice of self-neglect, a compulsion to give even when it harms. In this state, self-betrayal occurs quietly. One's own dreams are postponed, pain is swallowed, and personal boundaries evaporate. The core idea is clear and stark. By being endlessly available, one unwittingly sacrifices their own soul's well-being. It is a sacrifice no ancient altar would accept, for it feeds nothing noble, only the insatiable hungers of those around us. This is the central force we must understand, a gentle heart turned against itself, a life force bleeding out, unseen by the very people it seeks to serve. If emotional availability is a leak of psychic energy, there are those who have learned to weaponize this leak. Throughout history and myth, the generous and open-hearted are often preyed upon by the cunning. In the shadows of interpersonal relations, manipulators take on the role of psychic vampires, intuitively sensing who will yield to their demands. They know which hearts fear conflict and which souls can be bent by guilt. Like legendary vampires who can only enter a home if invited, these individuals can only drain us because we leave the door wide open. They feast on compliance and grow bolder with each boundary crossed. The tactics are as old as human ego. Some use anger and intimidation, flaring up when their demands are not met, to instill fear. Others are subtle, weaving webs of obligation and guilt. A sigh, a disappointed silence, a remark, "I guess you don't care about me," that pierces the tender heart. They push the buttons of our conscience, knowing how dearly we value the relationship. By making us fear we'll be seen as selfish or unloving, they shackle us in invisible chains. In this way, emotional availability is exploited as a weakness, a tool to ensure the manipulator's needs are always served. History offers us metaphors and lessons. One is reminded of Odysseus and the sirens. The siren's sweet song would lure sailors to ruin, much as flattery or feigned helplessness can lure a giver into exhausting themselves. Odysseus saved himself by binding his will, ordering his crew to plug their ears and tie him to the mast so he could not respond to the siren's call. Likewise, only by refusing the reflex to respond can one escape the rocks of manipulation. From ancient courts to modern households, the pattern holds. A kind soul becomes a puppet, and the manipulator the puppeteer, tugging at the strings of duty and pity. They may threaten to withdraw love, play victim to spark our sympathy, or even bestow conditional affection as a reward when we comply. Each tactic tightens the bind. In extreme cases, this dynamic turns Machiavellian, a calculated game of power where the one who cares less holds the upper hand. The more one person yields, the more the other rules. Here, we see emotional availability turned into a weapon against the giver, a means to control them without force, using only the loyalty of their own heart as a cage. It is a subtle form of domination, and its success hinges on one thing: the giver's unwillingness to stop giving. But when that changes, when the giving stops and silence fills the space, the entire game is thrown into disarray. Two faces, one public, one hidden. The mask of persona conceals the true self. Behind the outward dynamic of manipulation lies an inner psychological trap that ensnares the perpetually available soul. Internally, such a person is at war with themselves. On one side stands the persona, what Carl Jung described as the mask we wear before others that conceals and represses who we truly are. This persona is the people pleaser, the ever-reliable friend, the selfless partner. It smiles and says, "Of course, I'll help," even when the inner self cries out in weariness. The persona feeds on external approval. It has been crafted over years to gain love and avoid rejection. It is, as Jung noted, a compromise between individual truth and societal expectation. A carefully crafted identity mediating our interactions with the world. We come to believe this mask is who we are: the good son, the dutiful daughter, the problem solver, the caretaker. But this belief comes at a price. What happens to the authentic self behind the mask? It does not vanish. Instead, it retreats into the dark, forming what Jung called the shadow. The persona casts a shadow, Jung wrote. All those genuine feelings and needs that we suppress become part of the shadow. For the constantly available person, the shadow brims with unspoken resentment, fatigue, and longing. Each time they silence their own needs to meet someone else's, a bit of frustration, anger, or sorrow was exiled into this inner darkness. Over years, that shadow grows heavy. Perhaps it shows itself in moments of inexplicable sadness, or in quiet bitterness that whispers late at night. One might feel used or unappreciated, yet the persona smiles again the next day. Thus, the inner conflict churns. The compliant persona versus the angry, neglected shadow. This is the psychic trap, a split self, drained of energy by the fight between what one presents and what one truly feels. Moreover, powerful psychological forces keep the trap in place. Guilt is a formidable jailer. An inner voice insists, "If I don't help, I am bad. If I say no, I'll hurt them." This guilt is often instilled by upbringing or past hurt, and it keeps one chained to pleasing others. There is also fear of abandonment, fear of conflict, fear of losing the love one has worked so hard to earn. And so, the individual projects an image of themselves as the savior, the dependable one, and cannot imagine being otherwise. They might even project onto others the very authority that enslaves them, believing that the judgment of a friend or parent is absolute. and so they must contort to fit it. In truth, the stern taskmaster is largely within. Over time, the person becomes psychologically dependent on this role. Their very identity is entwined with being needed. If they are not available, who are they? This existential doubt binds them tighter. The persona mask whispers that without it, they are nothing, and so the mask stays on. Inside this trap, psychic energy is consumed by tension and pretense. Jung understood that our psyche has a limited supply of energy, which must fuel both our interaction with others and our inner growth. But if nearly all of it is spent maintaining the persona and attending to others, nothing is left to nourish the self. The true self starves in the shadow, while the false self dances for its supper. This imbalance often leads to symptoms: anxiety, depression, exhaustion, the psyche's cries for change. As long as one remains in this pattern, genuine joy and creativity are stifled. The individual is like a tree that grows in a planter far too small, roots bound and circling in cramped soil. Yet, even in the darkest trap, there is a seed of hope, the faint awareness that things are not right, that one is not living one's truth. That seed, tended by the discomfort of the shadow, can grow into a resolve to break free. And the moment that resolve takes hold, the entire psychic balance shifts. The mask cracks, the shadow stirs, and the stage is set for liberation. Breaking free from these chains is not easy. It is nothing less than a hero's journey inward. The path to liberation begins with an act of courage that is paradoxically passive: silence. To choose not to respond, not to offer oneself up as before. This is the first defiant step. Silence is not empty. It is the space where power returns. In the silence after a habitual yes dies unsaid, one can hear the long-suppressed voice of intuition. What does it say? Perhaps it sighs with relief, or cries out boundaries long ignored. Enough. No more. By embracing moments of silence and solitude, the individual creates a sanctuary where the self can reconstitute. It is like a weary knight retreating to a chapel after battle, laying down arms and listening for the guidance of the divine within. In practical terms, this path often means deliberately withdrawing availability. One stops reflexively answering every message, steps back from constant social obligations, and dares to be alone. At first, this can feel uneasy, even selfish, but soon a profound change begins. The energy that was flowing out is now retained. The leak is patched, the reservoir starts to fill. What was once given away freely becomes an inner wellspring of strength. Carl Jung called this journey the process of individuation, becoming one's true, whole self. He taught that individuation requires peeling off the false wrappings of the persona and reclaiming the projections we had cast out. In solitude, without others' voices to drown it, the authentic self emerges from beneath those wrappings. One begins to realize, as Jungian analyst Daryl Sharp put it, that the first fruit of developing a true personality is the segregation of the individual from the undifferentiated and unconscious herd. In other words, one must stand apart to find oneself. Solitude becomes not a void, but a crucible. In that focused aloneness, the psyche undergoes alchemy. The leaden weight of loneliness starts to transmute into the gold of self-awareness. Freed from constant external input, the mind clears and the heart steadies. The individual discovers that their own company is not something to escape, but a treasure to embrace. In the words of one Jungian sage, the more we enmesh ourselves with others and look outside ourselves, the less we individuate. No one else on earth has your exact gifts, and this recognition does not happen but in solitude. By turning away from out there, we make contact with the life within us. Slowly, an inner clarity dawns. One gains a much clearer sense of purpose and a reliable inner compass. With this compass, it becomes easier to discern which desires are truly one's own and which were implanted by others, which relationships reciprocate and which only take. Reclaiming energetic sovereignty also means setting new boundaries. At last, the word no is spoken not in anger, but with calm certainty, a sacred no that protects the sanctity of one's being. And yes is reserved for what truly resonates with the soul. This discernment is the sword of truth the hero brings back from the inner journey. No longer afraid of displeasing others, the individual can love others more genuinely, because they no longer betray themselves in the process. In this liberated state, relationships recalibrate. Those who only sought to exploit fade away, unable to siphon energy from a person who stands in self-possession. Meanwhile, true friends and lovers adapt and respect the newfound autonomy, or new, healthier connections emerge. The outer change is merely a reflection of the profound inner transformation. The once leaking vessel is now full and radiant, sharing its waters by choice, not compulsion. In the end, the journey of withdrawing one's availability is revealed as an archetypal death and rebirth. It is the death of a false identity, the compliant shadow of a person who existed only for others, and the rebirth of an authentic soul. Like a caterpillar entering the cocoon of solitude, it may feel like everything is ending. Darkness, stillness, maybe even grief for the old life accompany this retreat. But from that cocoon emerges a transformed being, wings vibrant and strong. The individual who steps out of the silence is no longer the same. They carry themselves with a quiet dignity, an aura of sovereignty that does not need to shout. There is power in their gentleness and purpose in their presence. In mythic terms, one might say they have returned from the underworld with the secret fire of life. No grand announcement marks this change, yet everything changes. The world senses the shift. Those who once controlled them lose their grip. New opportunities and respect appear as if by magic. But it is not magic. It is the natural consequence of a soul reclaimed. In that final scene, we find our hero alone atop a quiet hill at sunrise, the land below bathed in new light. There is no loneliness here, only solitude, sacred and alive. As the sun rises, the once fragmented self stands whole, illumined from within. The psychic rebirth is complete. In the silence, they have discovered a truth that rings through the ages. To be available to one's own soul is to finally become one's own sovereign. And in that sovereignty, a person finds that even in solitude, they are embraced by something eternal, the profound peace of being truly themselves.